Okay, everybody, so we're going to talk about women and advancements today during the period that we've been talking about. So our objectives and standards are to understand the advancements women made or worked towards during the period, and to analyze the impact of women's organizations on society. Take a moment there to read the standards. Desired result: what advancements did women achieve or work towards? Vocabulary: we have abolition, the banning of slavery and the slave trade. Suffrage is the right to vote. And the Seneca Falls Convention, which was held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, which was a meeting of women who want to expand rights, such as the right to vote. Excuse me. So educating women. During the early 1800s, girls and women had very little education. We talked about this already. And slaves had no right to education at all, but in the 1820s, African Americans in the North did have some type of limited education. Since they were free African Americans, they did receive some education, but again, it was very limited and probably segregated as well. There was also an increase in the number of schools for both boys and girls between 1820 and the U.S. Civil War. Schools for girls began to receive funding from churches, communities, and individuals in the 1830s and 1840s. Children were frequently taught English, modern languages, science, and mathematics. Now, girls were taught in private schools, known as seminaries, on topics such as domestic skills like cooking and cleaning. They really didn't receive science, math, language, things like that. So, goals of higher education. Women around the country also began to have, or demand, access to higher education, such as colleges and universities. You'll see a picture here. This was the first women's college in America, was Mount Holyoke Seminary in South Hadley, Massachusetts, and that's a picture right there from 1837, or a drawing of it, I guess I should say. Women there learned topics such as geography, English grammar, algebra, and science. And they also learned how to carry out domestic tasks as well. Many women who attended the school, Mount Holyoke, became teachers. Now, the first college to accept both male and female students was Oberlin in 1837. However, female students were treated very differently there. An example is female students were not allowed to speak in public. So improvements in women in literature and the media. Now, due to limits in education, many women and girls would actually educate themselves at home. They did this by reading and writing in the home. For example, many women were able to order newspapers or magazines to help improve themselves. We also have novels about home life and the family that were directed at women began to appear in the 1820s, and these stories focused on women in the home, but also focused on women facing challenges and tasks that they needed to succeed. So during the 1850s and 1860s, these novels became very popular, excuse me, with girls. Now, some magazines continue to strictly promote domestic roles of women, such as cooking and cleaning and caring for children. But there were some newspapers that did promote better rights for women around the country as well. And some men also joined this movement as well in supporting equal rights and privileges for women. So, women in abolition. Many women were active in different organizations, especially religious groups, charitable groups, or reform groups. One of these groups was a more radical group known as the abolitionist movement. A few women joined this. The abolition movement sought to end slavery and the slave trade in the United States. Most of these groups, or abolition groups, were found in the Northeast and the Midwest. Now, women did face resistance from men in abolition movements sometimes, so both white and African American women typically formed their own abolition groups since they kind of faced discrimination from men from joining these groups. And both white abolition groups and African American women abolition groups worked to stop slavery in the United States. Unfortunately, slavery will not end in the United States until the Civil War, or the end of the Civil War, and even then, still many African Americans are going to face discrimination and segregation, but we'll talk more about that later. So, fighting for the right to vote. Women who were involved in the abolition movement also began to look for rights elsewhere. Some of these women say, hey, we're pushing for rights and voting rights for African Americans. We don't have the right to vote, or we don't have certain rights and privileges, so we should also have these rights and responsibilities as women. So during the 1840s, the movement for women's rights gained more attention, in partial relationship to the growth of the abolition movement. Now, Lucretia Mott, this woman right here, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton over here organized a 2-day meeting in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, July 1848, excuse me. And this was known as the Seneca Falls Convention, and it discussed the rights of women and equality with men. I put an arrow there up there. You can see a woman discussing, rights and privileges of women at the Seneca Falls Convention. And it had about 300 people attended, so it had a pretty good turnout for it. Now, following the Seneca Falls Convention, there was another convention held in Rochester, New York, known as the Rochester Convention. Again, trying to push for women's rights to vote, women's rights in general. Now, there were some objections to the movement for women's rights by men and others around the country as well, but those involved in these movements continued to work for equality and suffrage. But unfortunately, despite their efforts and their hard work, women are not going to earn the right to vote until the 20th century. So it will take some time for women to earn the right to vote. All right, so our closure. What advancements did women achieve or work towards? Think about abolition, suffrage, the right to vote. Also, what did they do in terms of pushing for better rights in education and things like that? How did the media, newspapers help with that? And that will help you answer your question. All right, have a great rest of your day or night, everybody. Talk to you soon.